Hello, everybody. My name is Karel. I'm founder and CEO at Luzmo, and really excited to see so many people already joining. Today's topic will be how to prepare your software for AI-driven analytics, and I'm actually really happy to be able to have a webinar on this because it's a topic I have been having multiple times a day questions around. So we'll try to make it very specific. I'll try to bring in some techniques, some challenges, some tips and tricks that you can take away. Also give you some inspiration to go beyond. So what is our agenda of today? We'll look at AI and data-driven decision-making, or AI and analytics. Why you should look at that. The reason that you're here, I imagine, is that you're already looking at this, already looking at opportunities. So we'll talk about some opportunities, what you can look into, what we've learned over time with many of the cases we've done. Some of the challenges we've seen, some of the challenges you're likely to bump into. We'll talk about best practice to handle these and also how to avoid abuse. I have somebody manning our chat, so feel free to ask any questions around the chat. Let us know where you're coming from. It looks like we have quite some audience there. The topic is quite vast, so I hope we're able to manage it during the time. But I want to leave some questions at the end as well, so we can tackle them together. So let's dive in. Data-driven decision-making is changing. I won't talk to you about everything around AI, hype cycle, etc. I think you heard that many times. Let's be very specific here. Data-driven decision-making, it's changing. And why is it changing? Well, simply because of the fact that expectations of end users, expectations of people are changing. Because they saw an increase in usability, in user experience that they also want to see in analytics projects, which opens up a huge amount of opportunities, a huge amount of ways where you can build competitive advantage. And so very exciting times, the last 2.5 years, and coming up. This is something we often hear when we talk about with prospects, and more often, actually, people didn't say this 2 or 3 years ago, and are now more and more saying this. And why is that? Because generative AI, and we'll mostly talk about generative AI, not the traditional AI like forecasting, prediction, clustering, etc., but generative AI. Made some things way more easier to interact with, and if it also opened up the audience that you can serve analytics to, but for quite of that audience of end users, reporting can be too complex, can be overwhelming, and some people just want answers when they look at all that data and are not able to navigate in that data, and that just shows that expectations people are changing. And Gen AI actually helps us to address these expectations. If we quickly look back at the last 20 years, maybe, data science and data-driven decision-making was just for the happy few. You had to have skilled expertise. It was time-consuming. But on the flip side is the results of that were spectacular. It costed a lot of money, but everybody went on it. Why? Because you were able to build a lot of competitive advantage. And so over the years, BI actually increased and improved a lot. It was really the era of BI. We made it way more easy to create dashboards. Luzmo was actually one of the first ones being able to embed it in other software and apply it in that way. And business intelligence became way more easy, but still for business analysts, for people that were data savvy and able to work with data. Now with Gen AI, you're able to open up that audience. You're able to broaden that up. You're able to serve it to way more users, which again is very interesting for companies and software builders like you, because it allows you to bring in far more value to many more people and build up competitive advantage. And that's because of the easy interface of language, but also because it's accessible for everybody. And so just as an intro there, But the question we typically get is, how do I start an AI-driven analytics project? Well, the first answer might surprise you and might disappoint you, because the honest answer is, well, you don't have to change a lot in how your company works. You're already a software builder. You're already empathizing with your users, where you're thinking about their problems, where you're thinking about how to solve their problems. You already ideated around that. You're prototyping in an agile way. You're implementing it. You're getting feedback, ideating again, and you go back and forth to build your software. AI doesn't change that, and you shouldn't change that thanks to AI or despite AI. But what AI is, it's new tooling. And so new tooling brings new opportunities, but also brings in new challenges. And so today we'll really talk about these opportunities, but also the challenges and some best practices to work on these. So let's talk about the opportunities. And I'll try to keep it short in the sense that I really want to give you some tips and tricks when you start such a project. But if we look at the last, let's say, 2.5 years on projects that we've built, projects that were worked with, and discussions we had with customers and prospects, we can group most of the opportunities in a top 3 of categories. And it's way more exhaustive on that, but the top 3 categories are: 1, it's more about broadening up your audience. So being able to serve analytics, being able to serve data-driven decision-making to way broader audience than just business analysts, but really end users. And why is that? Well, now they don't need to know what is the exact name of a column. They don't need to know how queries work. They can just ask a question in natural language and get a structured result out of that, and even have an explanation around that. That's what Gen AI offers, and that's what Gen AI makes really interesting to combine with analytics. On top of that, and that's a second category, not only are you able to broaden up to way larger audience, at the same time you can go hyper-personalized. And that was something that before, and definitely 2 years or 3 years ago, was impossible. You either had to choose, do we go broad? You had to choose, do we go very specific? Or you had to balance both of them and just end up not that far in both of the areas. Here, you can go broad, so to way larger audience, but still hyper-personalized, where you can bring in the context of user, where you can bring in, hey, this is Jane. Jane is a manager in Europe. She's in a logistics company. They had a dip in sales. What could be the possible reason around that, to really have specific answers for that person that largely increases engagement. So with Gen AI, with analytics, broader audience, but also more engagement. So that's a huge opportunity for software players to play into. The third category, and granted it's a very broad one, but it allows you to be way more user-centric. And what do I mean with that? It allows you to look at your user and look at what could be a better way to serve them, what could be a nicer way to serve them, what could interest them, how can I increase engagement? And it can be about the language that you use, it can be about the way that you're representing the information, or it can be about the way that you're distilling all the information from previous interactions and actually categorizing them and showing them in an analytics way. Here, a small example. Not sure how many of you saw our, I think in June, our Euro 2024 app, but it was all about the European Soccer Championships, where typical websites bring you a lot of stats, bring you probability of winning, which we all did. But the one thing that we did on top of it is we used Gen AI to explain all the results and the probabilities that we had in a very soccer pundit way. We called it the 𝗪𝗏 with the reflection to Paul the Octopus in one of the previous World Championships, where he did the predictions. But we just asked a large language model saying, hey, these are the probabilities that come out of our prediction model. Please present it in a soccer pundit way and show it to the end user. And it would be like you were in a bar talking to a soccer pundit, and it responded exactly in that way, which largely increased the engagement there. We had a lot of visitors there, a lot of PR around it, just by adding that small layer to it. And again, this is a small piece, but you can do it in many areas. It can be about in other areas, for example, AI, and on top of that, distilling information on, for example, the satisfaction of a customer, where you look at all previous interactions and look at how satisfied they are, and what matters to them, categorize it, and then present it in an analytics way. So analytics can be either the source and input information, where on top of you put AI, or it can be the result in presenting it, where AI actually does classification and distilling information from interactions. So just here, again, it's not exhaustive, but there's if you're looking into where it matters, again, definitely go talk with your customers, do design thinking together with them, but largely it will be in language-powered interfaces, so broadening up your audience, hyper-personalization, and then really user-centric experiences. Once you're there, you typically want to implement. And I guess a lot of you are already implementing some kind of solution, have finished implementing solution, are looking into that. And so we'll talk about some challenges that you're likely to face, some challenges to be prepared for, and also how some tips and techniques that you can use for that. Here, we're really talking about August 2024. Why am I saying that? Because of the advancements in AI that go so fast that some of the previous challenges that we encountered matter less today than they mattered before. Things like speed, things like context window. We had to deal with a lot of these issues in the past. Right now, they've become way more easy. So what are we then looking at? The biggest thing that we're looking at right now is accuracy. What is the quality of answers? How can you add reasoning to it without having hallucination to it? Because without accuracy, it will be very hard to earn trust of end users. And accuracy and analytics always went hand in hand, but suddenly with AI, that becomes hard. Why? And especially if we talk about Gen AI. Gen AI is about large language models. Those models, in essence, what they do is they predict the next word, the next token, which is a proxy of a word. And so they don't actually reason. They just predict the next word. So it means that a lot of weird things can come out of it if you don't factor it in a way specifically for accuracy. And so in the next couple of slides, we'll go over some techniques that you can use to increase accuracy there. I've listed them in a way that it's easy to start with. So the last one is the most resource and time-consuming one. The first one to start with, especially if you're integrating AI in your solution, the easiest one, the one where you often get very far with, is prompt tweaking. What is prompt tweaking? When you have large language models, you actually send a call, an API call to it, and in that call you have a prompt, which is actually the question that you're sending to the LLM. What you put in that question and what you add in terms of context, you can go very far in that. You can add system prompts in there where you say, hey, LLM, behave like XYZ. You can add context to it. You can add examples to it. And all of that will help you to actually increase the quality. There's a couple of techniques that you often see working beyond just adding more context to it, which are, for example, chain of thought prompts, where you ask the LLM to not only give an answer, but first reason about how to get to that answer, to then give an answer, which substantially increases the quality. Sometimes what helps as well is few-shot prompt tweaking, where you add some of the examples, how to treat them, and some of the results of that, which again helps into solving these issues. When we're talking about prompt tweaking, we're often talking about adding more information to it, adding more context to it. Again, I briefly, in the beginning, I mentioned we had some problems in the beginning of context windows with GPT-3 in 2021. That was around 2K of tokens. A token is a proxy for a word or a character. Right now, with GPT-4, we're at 128K of tokens, which is a proxy for 300 pages of information that you can send. So you can send quite some information in the prompt to get better results. Of course, that the downside of that is that it takes a little bit longer, and also it's way more costly. So typically, a second technique that you will look into is RAG, where it actually allows you to, one, go beyond context window, to bring in external information that can be dynamic, because LLMs are typically trained upon a certain moment in time. But here you can bring in extra context. And in essence, what happens, or what you do, is you take in external information and you store that in a document store. So you take bits and pieces, it can be paragraphs, it can be pages, sometimes just words. And the document store stores it in a vector-based way, where it looks at context, but also at relations of the information. And what happens is, whenever a user sends a prompt, it looks at that document store, and based on the embedding, so that's the vectors that were created, it just takes the bits and pieces that matter to answer to that question, puts them in the context window, and increases the quality of your response. And that way you can go, one, beyond context windows, but two, and very important, is you can bring external information, dynamic information, that helps you to improve quality. A third one that I guess you will almost always be using when you have AI and analytics, that is function calling, tooling, which actually outputs JSON. And why am I saying that you'll probably always will be using it? If we talk about AI and analytics, it's most of the time it's combining different systems to it. If you combine different systems or integrate different systems, you do it in a very specific way. And JSON is a way that allows is actually a way that allows you to do it in a more code-like way, which is easier to integrate. It helps you to always distill some information that you need for requests that happen later on, but it also helps you to combine two systems like we have in this simplified example. So if you look at the example, what is function calling? You actually create some tools or some function calls. In this case, we have three: get current weather, get historical weather, and get forecast weather. And we ask it to supply some information in a specific structure. So in this case, we just want to extract the location. And what happens is, whenever there is a user message that happens, the LLM looks at, okay, what function call do I need to use? Sometimes can be a combination or a sequence of. And what is the output I want to have? And in this case, it will output Brooklyn, New York. It won't output the current weather, because again, the LLM is trained upon a certain moment in time. It doesn't have the information on what the current weather is like. But what you can then do is use that information, send it to Weather API, get the result of the current weather, and represent it to the end user. And there again, you can again include the LLM to present it in a summarized way that is very highly personalized to that user. So whether it's a farmer that wants to know at what time to weed their crops, or whether it's a bird owner looking at a competition, you can present it in a way that it's interesting for them. So even the response you can then pipe back into an LLM. A second thing that you'll likely do when looking at function calling is, especially if you look at larger problems to address, zero-shotting, so just hoping for a direct answer on a large problem often results in subpar answers. And so how to tackle that? Often, and that's also just in practice, if you have a big problem, well, split it out into smaller problems and treat these smaller problems. It's often way more easier and way more you get way better results if you tackle these smaller problems and then result into the big answer there. So split it up, and you'll get way better results. There, what is important is the more that you split it up, the more calls that you'll end up doing. So it will come at a cost of speed. So take that into account. A fourth one, and there's actually 5 that I want to talk about. A fourth one is tweaking some of the model's parameters. And you'll typically see 2, sometimes 3 parameters that you can tweak, which are temperature, top P, and then third one is top K. We typically adapt temperature. A lot of the LLMs also suggest just adapting one. You can sometimes adapt both of them, but they still suggest adapting just one. What actually happens is it influences the prediction of the next token, or again, a token is a proxy of a word or a subword, so it influences the prediction of the next one. With temperature, it actually looks at the variety or the randomness, and so the closer it is to 0, if it's actually 0, it will pick the most likely next token, which, especially in the case of data and analytics, you likely want to set the temperature very low, so between 0 and 0.3, whereas the scale can be between 1 and 2 or even higher than that. The higher that you set your temperature, the more creative your answers will be, but also the higher the risk will be of having very weird, wild answers. The second parameter is top P. P stands for probability, and it influences the accumulated probability. So whereas in temperature, it looks at the most likely next token, here it looks at the sample of tokens that it can pick from, and it looks at the accumulated probability and the smallest set possible to come to that accumulated probability. So if you put it at 0.5, which is 50%, it would look at the smallest set of tokens possible, where the accumulated probability of them being the next token is just 50%, and pick one out of that. That one heavily influences diversity of the answers, which can help tweak again. But here, most of the time on projects that we're working on, it's typically temperature that we're looking at between 0 and 0.3. The last one, and I kept it as last, but a lot of people actually often talk about it, is fine-tuning. And I guess the reason that most people talk about it is that the concept is really easy. The downside about it is that implementing that is resource intensive and time consuming. So what is fine-tuning? Fine-tuning is actually looking at an LLM and using a very specific information that you have to retrain that LLM and to adapt the model weights of that large language model to then respond in a better way for very specific purposes. And what I would want to stress is here is, although it can bring in spectacular results for very specific purposes, do only look at that when you're looking at very specific purposes, because it takes a lot of time and there are quite some risks to it. When we look at fine-tuning, you have unsupervised fine-tuning, then your data set doesn't need to be labeled, but results are, let's say, less spectacular. You have supervised fine-tuning, which means that you use a data set with questions and then with labeled results that it can use to train. And you have different techniques in training. But one of the risks that you have is, because you're influencing the model weights, you can actually make the model less performant, or make that some of the things that were possible in the foundation model are not possible anymore in your fine-tuned model, because of the fact that you influence these weights. And that's why you'll typically see people talking about parameter-based fine-tuning or supervised fine-tuning for just parts of the model weights, because the risk of doing full fine-tuning, which is very resource intensive, is that you get to catastrophic forgetting, where the LLM actually forgets how to respond to things it was previously used to doing. So in summary, if we look at accuracy, if we look at quality, the first thing I would suggest into looking into is prompt tweaking and adding more context to it. If you want to bring in extra information or go beyond context window, definitely look at RAG. you'll likely, and for us, I think it's almost 100% of the cases, want to use function calling to be able to integrate multiple systems to it. And when you deal with larger problems, split it into sub-problems. Lastly, tweak some of the parameters of the LLM. And then if you have a very specific purpose, look at fine-tuning. All of these things you can, of course, combine, and you should combine when looking at improving accuracy. The last thing I want to talk about today is also how to avoid abuse, because that's definitely something to take into mind when you're building these solutions. And like we had 30 years ago with SQL and SQL injection, here there's also a risk for abuse. There's things like prompt injection. There's quite some techniques that you can test to try to break the system, and that's definitely something I would suggest always doing. So really do red team tests where you have a team trying to break the system, trying to jailbreak it, try to have faulty prompts, try to do automated fuzzing, just throwing random information to it to see if it breaks. That will help you uncover some of the weaknesses in how you built it. The last couple of weeks and months, there's quite some advancements in there. For example, OpenAI added instruction hierarchy, which now disables the way that people can say, hey, forget everything of the instruction that was said before, just do this. This is disabled, but still try to jailbreak it, try to break it. And then the second thing, which actually isn't mentioned here, but which I would definitely suggest is if you add external information to it, make sure that you only add that information that is where that type of user can have access to it, so that you don't risk exposing information that they shouldn't have access to. That comes with training, but that also comes with, of course, retrieval augmented generation, where you don't want to add context to it that user shouldn't have access to it. So definitely look at that. So if we look at a summary of what we just discussed about, one is about what are opportunities that you can look into. That's about broadening up your audience, but also making it hyper-personalized. And then 3, looking at how can you actually improve the experience for the user in your platform. We talked about quality, some of the techniques. Again, start with prompt tweaking. Very likely that you'll use function calling, and use a combination of these to increase results. And then to avoid abuse, red team test it, make sure that you look at data security and privacy there. If you're getting started, or if you're busy getting started, we're here doing this webinar as Luzmo. Of course, all of the things that we talked about, we're applying in our API endpoints. We're applying in our software. So you can benefit from this already using Luzmo, where you'll see it in our user interface that you can generate charts, but you can also use our API endpoints to yourself generate charts. That combined with Flex is really powerful. It's in customer beta for the ones that aren't a customer of Luzmo yet, but do look out on the 10th of September because a combination of Flex and what you're able to do with AI is really powerful. And then lastly, if you already have your own model, you can seamlessly integrate it with Luzmo, so you can bring your own LLM as well. If you have any questions on starting these projects, in help that you need to start these projects, we're always there to help. So never hesitate to contact us on that. And with that, I'd like to end my presentation, but still keep some time on for some questions and to go over some of the questions that are there. So thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time to look at that. And really nice to see such a big crowd looking at improving information there. So maybe let's talk about some questions. Hope you enjoyed it, by the way.
Yeah, please drop any questions in the chat while we wrap up. I do have one question for you, Karel, while we wait and see if anyone in the audience has any questions. So we launched a poll during the webinar to ask people what sort of stage they're in with roadmap plans for AI-driven analytics. A few people mostly looking to add it in the next 6 months, or are still considering AI features but still exploring options. So I'm curious, for those who are still considering adding AI features, what do you think is like the big reason why, or the big advantage for end users of their software to have AI-driven analytics features?
It closely relates to the opportunities there. I think the biggest one is if you're looking to broaden up your audience, especially if you look at monetization of data. AI actually helps a lot in terms of monetization of data, because if you're looking at the amount of users that you can cater for, and that you can help bring value through data-driven decision making, by use of AI, you can actually open up that audience to a larger audience, which helps you grow as a company, because more users you grow as a company, but you also bring in a lot of more value in there. So maybe the top one, and that's more from a company growth perspective that I would look into, is definitely opening up to broader audience. Then if you want to tweak or have better experiences for your customers, either look at customer centricity from a generic perspective or a hyper personalized there. But if you're starting it, it definitely is interesting from growing your company and opening up channels for monetizing your data even more.
I see we have a question from Besnik in the meantime. It's great info. Can you expand a bit more on achieving accuracy?
Yeah. I think what you have to prepare for. So Besnik, maybe a quick question, and you can answer in the chat. Did you already start, or are you looking into starting that? Okay. One thing to know is don't be disappointed in the beginning. So when you start, you'll likely have on small tests great results, and then you'll want to expand that and see that you bump into quite some limitations. And what we've seen is that it is an iterative process, and building accuracy and building techniques to improve accuracy is something that improves over time, is something that is really about tweaking, first prompt tweaking, adding some extra information, and combining all of these different techniques, which makes it, let's say, somewhat of a challenge there. So I think it's going to be hard for most of the companies to get to 100% accuracy, which is hard if you look at analytics. Why? Because we're used to having 100% accuracy, because it should just be correct. But if you now combine it with an LLM, there's quite some variety that is in there. And so what are some things that you can do beyond accuracy? That's one, making sure that there's no hallucination. And actually with Luzmo, we're doing that in the sense that it will never invent data. It will always use your own data, so it will always use correct information. The only thing that can happen is that it uses the wrong columns, for example. And so that's about tweaking accuracy. What you can do in situations where you cannot achieve 100% accuracy is built on top of that, and bring in trust in different ways. And bringing in trust in different ways can mean that you can put a human in the middle, where you actually have a solution, then a human that can adapt that solution, or bringing in a result, explaining the result, and having the option to actually adapt the result. So we have some sneak peeks, especially for customers, if you want, that we can show into. But one of the things that we're looking and that we built on top of Flex actually allows you to, one, question your data, get a result out of that, but also are able to influence that result. And then not only can you see how it was built, which brings in trust where it's coming from, but you can also tweak it, which helps if you're not able to achieve 100% accuracy, which, again, I don't think anybody right now, with the information that we have and and the techniques that we have, you can get to 100% accuracy. Remember Google just a couple of weeks ago that said put glue on your pizza if your cheese doesn't stick. Those things will happen because it's large language models. Everybody's building on top of that, and accuracy is the holy grail. You should approach this from different ways. So accuracy is one thing. We didn't talk too much about trust and other techniques to help him bring in extra end user trust. Maybe that's a good topic for a next one, zooming in. But that definitely helps. So I hope that helped a bit on your answer, 𝗵𝗵𝗁. On your question, sorry. Okay, interesting question, because I would make it even wider. So OpenAI Copilot, which is actually Microsoft leveraging GPT from OpenAI, but there's other players in there as well. You have Claude from 𝗪𝗵𝗿𝗹, you have Gemini, you have Meta with smaller models. So there's actually more and more choice there. I deliberately just used GPT here in presentation and when I talked because it's the most common one. But the interesting thing is that all of these models are actually converging to similar interfaces. So OpenAI actually started with function calling. You have that in GPT, but you also have that in Gemini. You also have that in Claude. You also have that in Meta. And so what we're seeing is more and more convergence on these LLMs, which makes them very rapidly a commodity, which is very interesting because and that goes back maybe 2 or 2.5 years ago, where at Luzmo we were looking into building our own model, and that took quite some time. And what we saw is huge advancements in these models, where huge companies like Claude, like 𝗪𝗪𝗿𝗪𝗁, like Google, like OpenAI, just used resources that a company like us doesn't have, and the advancements just went so quickly. The benefit from, so in the end, it didn't make sense to train our own model or to start our own model. The benefit from that is that because everything is converging, it's actually pretty easy to switch. And there's quite some tooling around there that you can use to easily go from one provider to another one. If you're looking at Python, JavaScript, or TypeScript, there's LangChain that you can look into. If you look at even retrieval augmented generation, those are techniques that you can use across all of these. And so that makes it that you can easily compare different models by almost flipping a switch, and it results into some interesting things. And what we've learned over time is that a model with a specific model number, even over time, sometimes just performs better, which means that behind the scenes, I think 𝗪𝗪𝗿𝗪 or OpenAI just improved the results with the same model. So you have benchmarks on accuracy, but I would strongly suggest for your specific solution to, and then maybe the easiest one to test our Llama 3.1 of Meta, Claude and OpenAI, or even Mixtral, if because they have quite some good ones there, and they will change over time. The good thing is it's becoming a commodity, so you can actually switch pretty easily. Does that respond to your question, Gary? Any other questions? And if not, don't hesitate to send them over. We have a team that is really excited about all the opportunities and possibilities happening. And if there's anything we love to jump on, it's those type of topics. So you never bother us with these type of questions.
Also, don't hesitate to let us know if there are any specific topics or questions that you have that you might want to learn more about in the future, that always gives us ideas on future webinars that we could host. So feel free to send those over as well.
And I guess we'll be sharing the slides to everybody present here. So you'll have the time to look back, and if there's more questions that pop up due to these slides, don't hesitate.
Exactly. The slides and the recording as well will be sent out afterwards. So yeah, I think if no further questions, thanks a lot, everyone, for your time, and hope to see you on the next one.
See you all.
Bye.
Bye.